One of the most effective tricks in horror is convincing audiences that the story being told on the screen is a real one, that the terrifying events playing out in front of them really happened, or at the very least really could happen. Before the Blair Witch Project made this blurring of fact and fiction go viral, and before the Texas Chainsaw Massacre started a worldwide legend, the medical student Michael Crichton tried his hand at writing fiction as fact. Inspired by the concept of crystal-based lifeforms, he came up with a scenario whereby an alien organism has descended upon the Earth, and he couched his story in the bonds of hyperrealism and technical jargon, replete with fictional footnotes and a made-up bibliography. The book was an enormous success, launching the career of one of the biggest science fiction writers of the 20th century, and it wasn't long before Hollywood took notice. In 1970, the prestigious director Robert Wise, who directed many notable films including West Side Story, The Haunting, and The Sound of Music, was itching to get back into science fiction, a genre he loved and had greatly influenced with his 1951 film The Day the Earth Stood Still. With this in mind, Universal sent him a copy of Michael Crichton's hit novel The Andromeda Strain, and told him that if he liked the book, they'd purchase the rights. Wise did, and Universal subsequently paid $250,000 so that Wise could turn it into a feature film. To put together a screenplay, Wise opted against hiring Michael Crichton, believing that authors tend to resist the changes necessary for a proper adaptation. Instead, he turned to his longtime collaborator Nelson Gidding, who'd written the screenplays for Wise's I Want to Live, Odds Against Tomorrow, and The Haunting. Gidding was surprised by Crichton's attention to detail and strong sense of realism, and he even tried to follow the author's cited research in the book's bibliography, only coming to realize then that the entire list was full of fictional citations. Inspired, Gidding designed his screenplay the same way, treating it like a technical document full of made-up charts and diagrams. After consulting with Gidding, Wise decided to adopt a documentary style for his film, so when it came to casting, he didn't want any big-name stars to detract from the realism. The four scientists at the core of the story are played by veteran character actors Arthur Hill, whose biggest role was opposite Paul Newman in Harper, David Wayne, who classic Batman fans will recognize as the Mad Hatter, James Olsen, star of the Hammer-produced sci-fi flick Moon 02, and Kate Reid, most well known for her stage work, though moviegoers would have recognized her as Natalie Wood's domineering mother in This Property is Condemned. Gidding was pretty faithful in his adaptation, but one significant change he fought for was the gender swapping of the character of Dr. Levitt. Wise himself was skeptical that a female scientist would work, worried that it would be a repeat of what he felt was the ridiculous inclusion of Raquel Welch in Fantastic Voyage. But after consulting with real scientists and listening to the persistent arguments of his screenwriter, Wise eventually relented. In hindsight, after the film was finished, he realized it was the right decision, and he considered Dr. Levitt to be the most interesting character in the film as a result. Other notable actors include Paula Kelly, who'd go on to appear in Soylent Green before landing a regular role in Night Court.
Male, female.
Eric Christmas, who'd become most well known for Porky's.
Please line up so that you can identify his tallywhacker.
And Michael Crichton himself, who cameos in the background of this scene. For the fictional town of Piedmont, they filmed on location in the fading mining town of Schaffner, Texas, which recently had a population of only 11 people according to the 2000 census. It had a few more people living in it in 1970, but due to its remote location and the fact that the town's silver mines had all been shut down, it was rapidly becoming a ghost town, filled with abandoned buildings and empty space. A few of the locals happily agreed to play the parts of the deceased Piedmont natives, and the town still occasionally gets movie-buff tourists who like to take pictures in front of the iconic church. The wildfire facility where most of the film takes place was made of several sets that cost upwards of $300,000 to construct, and were some of the most detailed and intricate sets made at the time. The central core, which serves as the setting of the film's climax, was constructed in a soundstage, with part of the floor removed and a 70-foot hole dug beneath it to make room. The different colored hallways that mark the various floors of the complex were all actually the same hallway, painted over between shots. Some of the props, such as the manipulator arms, were real, or at least based on real existing technology. This made it easier to bring in a few utterly fictional devices and bits of technology which, though somewhat easier to pick out with modern eyes, were completely indistinguishable to contemporary audiences, lending even the most fictional beats of the story an air of credibility. To do the visual effects, Wise hired Douglas Trumbull, an effects wizard who launched his career working on Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Trumbull was just breaking out on his own with his own company, and not fully appreciating the costs associated with doing the effects for the Andromeda strain, he severely underbid to get the contract. Reportedly, the studio only had to pay $250,000 for the effects, which was much less than they probably cost. This error in judgment would take Trumbull to the brink of bankruptcy, though his exceptional work was good enough to get the attention of Hollywood, and a year after the Andromeda strain, it paved the way for his dream project, Silent Running. There are no computerized effects in the Andromeda strain, aside from the occasional bit of green text on a screen. 3D computer models were faked, using complicated rotating images projected onto a three-dimensional surface, and many of the microscopic shots are real, albeit occasionally taking advantage of upscaled models. To pull it all off, Trumbull pioneered computer-controlled microphotography that used incredibly high-resolution cameras. The Andromeda strain itself, as seen in shots like this one, is a physical object based on a Jacob's Ladder toy that unfolds geometrically. It was filmed conventionally, but then the film was put through exhaustive practical post-production to give it a more unreal look. Amusingly, for some shots of the organism that are compared by the characters to green paint, Trumbull actually used blobs of green paint.
You know something? They do look like spatters of paint.
Some of the most controversial sequences involved the use of animals, which are seen in the film apparently dying of exposure to the alien pathogen. To achieve the effect, the animals were exposed to a room filled with carbon dioxide, which caused them to pass out once their oxygen-rich cages were opened. They were immediately revived by a technician off-screen wearing scuba gear, and each sequence was overseen by an ASPCA representative and signed off by the American Humane Society. No animals were harmed, but this technique would probably not be accepted in Hollywood today. The score was composed by the American artist and jazz musician Gil Mallet, who delivered a kind of non-melodic soundscape that combined conventional instrumentation with unconventional sound effects and electronic elements. It's one of the more interesting sci-fi film scores of this type, inspired by the pioneering work of Bebe and Louis Barron on Forbidden Planet, and Mallet earned a Golden Globe nomination for it, which is especially impressive given that this was his first ever film score, though certainly not his last. The Andromeda strain released in March of 1971. It didn't do especially well with critics, with many complaining that the film was too plodding and antiseptic, though they admired it for adhering surprisingly close to Crichton's novel. However, it was a modest hit with audiences, ultimately earning just over $12 million domestically against a $6.5 million budget. It did garner a few award nominations for its music, art direction, and editing, and it has managed to earn a lasting legacy as one of the better Michael Crichton film adaptations. For me, I've been perhaps a bit too critical of it in the past, but I recognize that it is perhaps one of the best portrayals of the scientific method ever put to film, which is highlighted by Giddings' pseudo-realist script and Wise's use of documentary flair. I especially love Wise's cinematography, marked by several gorgeously framed split-focus diopter shots. The plot is driven almost entirely by the struggle of science to overcome human error and human folly, to overcome the burdens of politics, prejudice, oversight, and miscommunication in an effort to figure out the truth. It's easy to think that the antagonist of the film is the titular disease, but in this story, the protagonists and the antagonists are one and the same, and it is only through careful use of scientific reasoning that our heroes are able to survive. It's also really well acted, with distinct characters who each play a critical role in events. I have to once again single out Cade Reed's Dr. Levitt as being the standout character, who I find both entertaining and annoying in a way that makes her feel like a real human being.
Something wrong?
I never liked red lights. Reminds me of my years in a bordello.
Wise is right to consider her the most interesting character in the film, and I don't think there are many actresses who could have pulled it off as well as Reed. I also love the underlying sense of domestic Cold Era paranoia that goes throughout the film, including the framing story of an after-the-fact closed-door congressional hearing. The film really takes advantage of late 60s, early 70s skepticism of government, of the unspoken belief a lot of people had that they were being kept locked away from shady events while under constant surveillance.
Dad,
Are you there? What's going on?
This communication is being monitored. The connection has been broken for reasons of national security.
All that said, I still take issue with the story's deus ex machina of an ending, where the disease mutates into a benign form and is swept out to sea. Not only does it make absolutely no sense that every molecule of the organism would mutate at the same time to be harmless to humans, leaving no deadly molecules behind, but it's bizarre that it would take the scientists so long to figure out that the harmful strain can only thrive in a super tiny sliver of alkalinity, given that they test it against hundreds if not thousands of growth mediums of various pH levels. I recognize that these are nitpicky complaints, but they really do detract from the story for me. On balance, though, these complaints are vastly outweighed by the impressive filmmaking on display. The Andromeda Strain is a great and important movie that stands as one of the best science fiction films of the early 70s. It helped expand the growing careers of Michael Crichton and Douglas Trumbull, and it remains one of Robert Wise's best films, despite the fact that Robert Wise has directed at least a dozen great films. When it comes to portraying real science, it blurs the line between fact and fiction so seamlessly that it is a better advocate for critical thinking than most non-fictional documentaries on the subject. Therefore, The Andromeda Strain is, without doubt, a science fiction classic. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What's your favorite film about the process of science? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd also be grateful if you'd consider joining my Patreon, where you'll get access to bonus videos, vote on future topics, and more. You can also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature, including a review of the Andromeda Strain novel. But until next time, when we'll be looking at something else that came from outer space, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
Hell of a way to run a hospital.